What up, YouTube? We are currently at the top of St. Paul's Cathedral. We just sprinted up here, first people here today, so we could be at the top by ourselves. But today, I want to talk about improving your iPhone photography game.
Yeah.
All right, Logan, what's the first step to improving your iPhone photography game?
First step's actually to pull out your iPhone and turn it on.
You're gonna turn on your iPhone.
Simple.
You are going to go to the App Store and download the application LightRoom CC. Once you download that application, you are going to sign up for an account, totally free. You don't need an Adobe subscription or anything like that. You're gonna get into the app with that new account, and then we're gonna move on from there. So the reason we're using this app is because it gives us the ability to shoot in RAW format. So one of the main reasons that people use DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras and things like that, among many other reasons, is so that they can shoot in what's called RAW format. So what RAW does is it gives us a ton more flexibility in editing. So we can edit the colors, we can edit the exposure, and do a whole bunch of changes to really get a custom look out of our photos. So in order to shoot in RAW format, what we're gonna do is actually use the camera that's built into the LightRoom application. So once you launch the app, you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner that there is a symbol for your camera. You're gonna click on that, which is going to probably ask you for permission to use your camera. Give the application permission to use the camera, and then click on the very top where it says JPG. You're gonna click on JPG and switch it over to DNG format. And what this is going to do is it's gonna give you the ability to shoot in RAW format, which gives you, like I said earlier, all of that flexibility in editing. Last thing we're gonna do before we're off to the races is we're gonna go into the application. Once you're in the camera module, in the bottom left-hand corner, click on where it says auto, and you can change it to either professional mode, which gives you the ability to change like the shutter speed and the aperture and things like that. We're not gonna worry about that for now, but if you click on the high dynamic range mode, what it actually does is it takes multiple photos and then it'll stitch them together for you automatically and make the photos look even better before we edit anything. Once we change it into high dynamic range mode, then we're off to the races and we can start taking pictures. What up, YouTube? As you can see, we are no longer in London. I'm actually at my parents' house in Buffalo, New York to celebrate Thanksgiving. It was a crazy couple of days of travel in London. I filmed a lot and I actually have one or two more videos that I'm going to post, but I wanted to leave this part of the video for when I got back to Buffalo or back to Boston or whatever, because it's going to be a lot easier for me to explain all of this somewhere where it's quiet and I have a little bit more time to explain all these different steps. So during the past week in London, I spent a ton of time taking photos on my cell phone. I actually didn't really take any photos at all on my actual camera. I spent the majority of the time just taking them on the LightRoom app on my phone so that I could get a really good example of what you can take on your phone using this application. So now that we've taken a bunch of photos on the LightRoom application, the first thing that we're going to do is open up the application, scroll through, and find a photograph that we think that we like, that we think that we want to edit. So for example, I'm going to pick this one. I like this one. I think that I'll be able to edit it to get a really unique look out of it. So once we have the photo pulled up, the first thing you'll notice if you used the HDR mode is that there's already actually a whole bunch of changes made. I highly recommend using the HDR mode, like I said earlier in the video, because what it's able to do is actually take several photos and then blend them all together to give you much more flexibility when you're editing. The one problem, in my opinion, however, with HDR mode is that it gives all of your photos a very, very flat look. There's not a ton of contrast, and honestly, all of the photos look very similar to one another. The highlights are perfectly exposed for, and the shadows are perfectly exposed for, but it's a very flat image most of the time, and I want to show you how you can change that using this LightRoom application and really get a customized, more contrasty look out of your photos, which is something that I really go for when I'm taking photographs. So when you use the HDR mode, you'll notice that it actually already makes a ton of adjustments to the photo. So if you click into the light tab, you'll notice that, for example, on this photo, the highlights were pulled down by 80 points, the shadows were bumped up by 80 points, and even if you go into the color tab, you can see that there's some adjustments made there, and so on and so forth. But if you scroll all the way to the right, which is the first thing that I would recommend doing, click on the Reset tab, and then click on All, and that's going to give you the ability to completely get rid of all the adjustments that Lightroom automatically applied to it so that then we can start from the beginning and add our own adjustments to the photo. Lightroom is an extremely robust editing tool that allows for you to do all sorts of adjustments to your photos, but I want to keep it really simple today for people who might not necessarily be super familiar with photo editing and things like that. So in order to do that, I want to just focus on the three basic tabs: the Light tab, the Color tab, and the Effects tab. What the Light tab really allows for you to do is adjust the exposure. So you can make the photo either brighter or darker. You can adjust things like the highlights, which are just the brighter parts of the image. You can make them brighter or darker, as you can see me doing on the screen. With the Shadows tab, that allows for you to adjust things like the foreground, as you can see me pulling out all of the detail in all these buildings. And you can even make that a little bit darker if you want to. The Color tab allows for you to do adjustments, obviously, like it says, to the color. You can either warm up the photo like this, making it much more golden, or you can cool it down and make it a lot more blue. You can also adjust the tint, adding pink into the photo or green into the photo. My phone's about to die. You can also just do things like adding vibrance, which adds a little bit more saturation to certain parts of the photo, or add saturation itself, which adds saturation across the entire photo. Honestly, I'm not 100% what the difference is between vibrance and saturation, but that's something that you can definitely Google if you wanted to. I think that vibrance is a little bit more intelligent. It just adds color to more dull parts of the frame, whereas saturation just adds color to everything. And then the final tab that I want to talk about today is the Effects tab, which allows for you to apply a whole bunch of different effects to the image, such as clarity, dehaze, and vignette, which I'll go into all of those in a little bit. But clarity makes your image just essentially more clear, like it says, like clarity would say. Dehaze allows for you to, like it says, dehaze the image. So if you have a really hazy sky or a really cloudy day, using this slider will actually allow for you to cut through some of that haze in order to bring out more detail to the stuff that's behind the clouds or the fog or whatever it is. And then finally, vignetting allows for you to add that little black border around the edges of your photograph, which on occasions allows for you to, if you have a subject that's in the center of the frame, it allows for you to really single out that subject that's in the center of the frame. All right, I want to dive in and show you exactly how with this photograph I would get a very unique look out of it. So if you've been following me on Instagram, you'll know that for a lot of my most recent posts, I've been going for this very contrasty and warm look to my photographs. For example, these right here. So what I want to do is replicate that with this photo, and I want to try to get a very similar look to that so that when I post it on my Instagram feed, it'll look like it's in the right place and it fits in with the rest of my photographs. So how we're going to do that is the first thing that we're going to do is go into the Light tab. And just looking at it right now, I can tell that the sky is already pretty much exposed to where I want it to be. So I'm not going to make any real adjustments to the entire photo's exposure or to the highlights. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go down to the Shadows tab and I'm going to pull up some of the details in the foreground. So if you just tap like either side of the slider, it allows for you to do increments in 5s. So I just pulled it up 65 points in the shadows, and I think that looks pretty good for right now. And I want to add some contrast to this photo, which kind of makes the sky brighter and the foreground a little bit darker and makes it just more contrasty. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Typically, what people would do is they'll go into the contrast slider and they'll just slide that way up. But honestly, I don't usually like how that looks. So let's set that back to 0. And we're going to do this in a very customizable way. So you see this curve button in the top right corner of the light slider. I'm going to click on the curve and I'm going to put 3 dots on the curve on all of these different cross intersections. What this allows for you to do is customize the way that you add contrast to the photo. So if you add 3 dots like I just added to it, the bottom dot will allow for you to adjust the contrast and the light tones of the shadows, and the top dot will allow for you to adjust the contrast and the light tones of the highlights. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to make what's called a simple S-curve. I'm going to pull up the highlights a little bit, just like that, and then I'm going to pull down the shadows just like that. The tone curve is a pretty complex tool, and you can actually jump into all of the individual color channels, making adjustments to the reds, the greens, and the blues, and allows for you to get a really, really awesome look to your photo. I'm not going to jump into that today because it gets a little bit complex, and honestly it takes a long time to edit if you're adjusting all of the different color channels. Alright, so now that we've adjusted the light tab and we think it looks pretty good where it's at, we're going to move into the colors tab and make some adjustments there. This tab is super important because it allows for you to change the colors, the color tones of your image, and oftentimes the color tones of people's images is what gives them their custom look on their Instagram feeds. So if we go into this, I already know that what I want to do is make the image warmer. I'm probably not going to change a whole lot past that, but let's just bump that up a little bit. So as you can see, I'm just tapping the right hand side again. It's bumping it up by increments of 50. That looks like it's a little too much, but if we bring it down to 6250, I think that gives it a pretty good look. So if we already just look at the before and after, if you hold your finger down in the middle of the page, it'll show you the before. This is the before of the image, where it was very flat, the sky was blue, the foreground was completely exposed for. If we let go, it's the after, and I think, in my opinion, it already looks a heck of a lot better. Then we're going to scroll down. I think I might add a little bit of saturation. No, honestly, I'm going to leave the saturation where it's at. But what I'm going to do is actually pull some of the blue out of the image. So what you're able to do is in the top right corner where it says mix, you can click on that, and it gives you the ability to adjust the amount of saturation that each individual color in the photo has. So I want to pull a little bit of the blue out of the sky. I want to make the sky very gold, and I don't really want any blue in there at all. You can see there's a tiny bit of blue in the sky, but not a ton. I just want to get rid of that entirely. So I'm going to go into the mix tab, and I'm just going to go to the saturation of the blue and just pull that down, let's say 60 points. And I think that looks good there. So already where we're at, just making those two adjustments in the color tab, it's given us a completely different look to this photograph. So the last thing we're going to do to make our final adjustments to this image is go into the effects tab. The first thing we're going to look at is the clarity slider. I personally don't really like pulling a ton of clarity into my image. I think it makes it look a little bit muddy. If anything, what I like to do is actually pull the clarity down because it gives your image more of like a dreamy, it's hard to explain, but I'll see. Like if you pull the clarity slider all the way down, you can see that it makes it look just like a lot more dreamy and kind of like, it gives it a very unique look. I'm not going to pull it down this much, but I'm going to pull it down, let's say pull it down 10 points. And it gives you a little bit more of a unique look in the sky there. I'm also going to pull down the dehaze slider a little bit. I'll show you what it looks like if you pull it up. If you pull it up, it pulls a lot of the haze out of the sky, like I said earlier, and gives you a lot more detail in the clouds. But for this specific image, I don't want to do that. Let's say we pull down the dehaze here by 20 points. And the last thing that I'm going to do is pull down the vignette. So as you can see, what that does is it really darkens the edges of the image. I don't want to do it too much because then it just begins to look really fake. But let's pull it down like 20 points. I think it looks pretty good right there. So the last thing that you're going to have to do is go into the export button in the top right corner of your screen. Just hit save to camera roll. And then when it asks you for image size, hit maximum available. And then once you do that, it's going to render it, send it to your camera roll, and then you're just going to be able to, from there, upload it to Instagram, Facebook, or wherever you want to upload it. As you can see, just by making these couple different small adjustments in the light tab, the color tab, and the effects tab, it gave us a very, very unique look to the image. And it's something that not everybody is going to have on their Instagram feed. When people are just taking photos with their camera on their iPhone, all of their images are processed in the exact same way. You just let your iPhone basically do the work for you, and nobody really has a unique look. If you want to get a very customizable look, the best possible way to do it, in my opinion, is through this LightRoom application. There is a pretty considerable learning curve to it. You do have to learn how to edit photos just like any professional photographer would have to do, because LightRoom is actually the same application that most professional photographers use on their laptops. But once you get a hang of it, you can really get customizable looks out of all of your photos, even the photos that are taken on your iPhone. I personally shoot with DSLR cameras, mirrorless cameras, and a whole bunch of different cameras. But when I'm just trying to get a quick shot and I don't necessarily want to pull out my camera, I just pull up this LightRoom application and I'm able to get almost the exact same look that I would get with one of my mirrorless or DSLR cameras. So there's a number of reasons why somebody would use a DSLR or a mirrorless camera for their photography. However, for simple landscape and cityscape and still life photos, The phone that's in your pocket is more than capable of getting an awesome image if you know what you're doing with it. Using the LightRoom application will help you to really develop your skills as a photo editor, and I hope that the lessons that I taught you today will carry forward and allow for you to create some awesome images. If you thought that this tutorial was helpful, please hit subscribe on the button below, like this image, comment if you want to, and stay tuned for some more content in the future. Thank you.